Hello, Internet. I am Firebolt.
And I'm the Orbiter.
And welcome to Breaking Borders, episode
Ooh,
2.
Nearly.
Indonesia part 2, because there's a lot of history there, and
Indonesia, the sequel.
I mean, I could have kept going last time, but we were running over quite a bit.
Come on, it'd have been over 3 hours.
Yeah. I should be like a history lecturer or something.
You should be like one. In what respect?
That I don't know. I'm very fucking tired today.
Yeah.
It's been an odd week for me.
I'm not sure I can be asked. Should we bother?
Yeah, well, we will bother. Because I have all my notes there and I can't wait for another time. Whatever. Anyway,
congratulations.
To explain, quite a few things actually. If you are not aware, on like the week before this probably goes out, I came out as non-binary, which kind of feels a bit strange.
Welcome to the world, Elwing.
Yeah, I'm not used to just being like fully out. It's just sort of kind of strange at the moment. But
thank fuck for that is all I can say. Because I don't have to worry about accidentally outing you anymore.
But yeah, I picked an interesting time to do that because for the last 3 days, including the day that we're recording this, I have been basically doing non-stop something called without like the sleeping and stuff, something called Crisis, which is something that's done as like part of like the model UN conferences, but it's sort of like D&D in Suits, I've heard it described as. Basically, you send off directives to like a back room to do what you want with your nation or your character, that sort of thing. It's kind of... I ended up being quite peaceful, which I was surprised by. I wanted to take back Beric. I was playing
Tweed.
I was playing Mary Black in a 2048 Scotland that has become independent.
And this was the thing in which you killed Coldplay, wasn't it? This is what we were.
Yeah, I bombed an English Conservative Party conference and...
Not actually.
I
mean... yet.
Yeah, no, they invited Coldplay for some reason, because, you know, which neo-fascist government doesn't like Coldplay? Anyway, yes, that's boring to people that aren't actually a part of it, which I found quite a lot.
I have been on virtual placement all week. I should have been in the first of 3 weeks of being in schools, but obviously that's not happening at the moment. So we had a virtual replacement of that online. So it's been a long week and stuff. I don't know what tonight's episode is going to be like. We're gonna find some more stuff out about Indonesia.
I know we had a bit of feedback from the wonderful Craig.
Yes, who has
sent us this beer,
Peaky Blinder,
as a congratulations for my coming out.
Yes, and
it's very nice.
It is nice. Peaky Blinder Black IPA.
I'm not quite sure what the flavour is, but I like it.
Where is the Black Country? This is where it comes from.
It's in the Midlands or something. I don't know.
Stourbridge.
I don't know. That's where that is.
So, anyway. So, yes, thank you. We had a bit of feedback from him. So, and actually, I should mention I took part in the After Dark Podcast Network quiz and pub chat last night, and it was good fun.
Yeah.
I had to choose between
West Midlands.
I had to choose between drinkies and games with my student teacher colleagues from uni, or the After Dark Network quiz, and it was neck and neck. And I basically sat down at 9:15, and it was going to be first come, first served. Whoever was there first, basically. But I'm glad I ended up on the quiz, because when I looked in on Discord, my colleagues were playing chess, which doesn't strike me as particularly... I mean, I don't mind chess as a game, but it doesn't particularly strike me as a drinking activity.
See, the problem with going to university, and I admit I am one of these people, is that everyone's such a fucking massive nerd.
Yeah, that is true. But it's kind of reassuring to be amongst your own kind.
Yeah, I like the sort of mix of chaotic and nerdiness that I get with some friend groups.
I have to mention Tom as well, because he put a comment on one of the YouTube videos. Apparently I called him a knob in the last episode. I don't remember doing... Well, I kind of vaguely do. It was a passing comment, wasn't it? But as a result, he's been invited to come along and feature on one of our episodes. So we shall be entertaining young Thomas at some point.
You make it sound so dirty.
We shall see. Pardon me.
General news, though.
We're not allowed to do general news. Craig said so.
No, well, that's what I was going to say. I think we should still do some general news.
A little bit.
Because I can't really remember some of the things that happened. But anyway.
Women are getting shafted on the mainstream media. Basically, Nicola Sturgeon.
Oh, yeah.
Versus Alex Salmond.
I actually, in this 3-day conference, got a speech from the former First Minister of Scotland before Alex Salmond.
All right. Who was that?
He's like a... No, he's Lord...
he's a Lord?
Yeah, he's like a Labour life peer.
Okay.
The Lord of Glencorrigan. I've forgotten his name, though.
I think it might have been certainly since the last Breaking Borders episode, not necessarily since the last Breaking Bollocks, I'm not sure, but the news from Matt Hancock got buried, didn't it? That Oprah Winfrey interview's coming out today, isn't it? Is it today?
I don't give a fucking shit about royal news. I just find it...
They're not royal, though. That's the best thing about it. They're not really royal anymore. It's the royals that are getting.
I mean, they literally had a fucking outed paedophile there, and they were just like, no, that's fine. That's regular royal stuff. That's just the aristocracy. But I don't even know what people are angry about.
Let's face it, it was extremely convenient for Matt Hancock, wasn't it?
That's because it's an entirely fucking fabricated story, like all the manufactured rage around the royals.
Oprah's in on it. Do you think Alex Salmond's getting a backhander from the Tories?
Yeah, well, I think he's just happy getting paid by fucking RT at the moment.
It's difficult knowing who's controlling what. I reckon Putin's got some kind of hand in all of the chaos. He usually has, hasn't he? Just kind of...
Well, it's simple. He's self-interested. He wants, like, settlement money, and he doesn't really care about anything particularly, Alex Salmond, I don't think, anymore. Like... But the thing that annoyed me with that is that they basically boiled it down to blaming Nicola Sturgeon for things that Alex Salmond probably did, like sexually harassing women, possibly sexually assaulting women. And it's just like, why is that not the story there, rather than this fucking very minute details of like parliamentary procedure?
What I want to know is why leaders of the SNP have to be called by fish names.
I don't know. What do you think the next one's going to be?
Somebody Codpiece or
I mean,
Harry Haddock.
Okay.
It could be Paul Brill.
Oh, that's... God help us all.
Or even Elwing Brill.
I'm not leading the SNP.
For those who don't know, a brill is another kind of fish.
Yeah. Anyway,
which I didn't know until I was way too far into my life to. I can't even remember. I can't finish sentences. My brain's given up. Right?
No,
Are we?
me
What
neither.
have you done? General news?
Well, I'm pissed off at the Democrats because they have
Which ones?
the US ones.
Yeah, right. Okay.
They have a majority in both houses. They have the presidency,
Yeah.
and yet they still don't pass fucking minimum wage
Okay.
because their own party
Oh. Yeah. Sorry. Carry on.
voted against it, and the leadership basically did nothing to push it. Like, they just don't fucking care. They just it fucking annoys me.
This might be out of date by Thursday, but I don't know. It's not really. Well, it is related, but it's a different country. It's our country. Well, it's not actually our country. It's England. I don't know what the Scottish position is on this, but I think half of the nurses are about to go out on strike.
Yeah.
Because the government's just turned around and given them a big fuck off.
I mean, they got a
After they've been risking their
1%
lives.
pay rise, which is actually a real terms pay cut, which doesn't even cover car park costs, which I thought they were meant to be getting rid of, but I mean, it just seems like a fucking stupid thing to charge your own staff car parking charges for the NHS.
You don't even get charged as a visitor at Aberdeen Royal Infirmary.
Oh, but
It's like you just free park.
They've privatised it so much at this point. It's just disgusting.
Which is why I say I don't know what the deal is at the moment with it, because NHS Scotland's separate, isn't it?
Yeah, I would guess that would go through a separate procedure. Especially as I think...
Is your laptop about to take off?
Yeah, it does that occasionally. This is computers, isn't it?
It is.
Anyway, I think, like... Didn't they, like, send payments to nurses because they thought that the UK wasn't actually paying them enough, or was that something else?
I don't know if that's... what you're referring to might be carers allowance. They give carers an extra payment twice a year because they don't think that carers allowance... paid by the DWP is enough. So Scotland give an extra bonus every 6 months.
But yeah, I mean, I think the sort of goal of all the sort of posturing around the whole... I mean, they've made it into a Sturgeon thing when it's really just Alex Salmond probably raped some people. And that's something to do with the SNP, so therefore, like, trying to present it as the story of, like, oh, could support for independence be faltering?
I said at the beginning of the year that it's going to be smear campaign after smear campaign until May, isn't there? Just to try and stop them getting seats.
Tories can literally break the law and kill thousands of people.
Well, that's the thing.
And they either get swept under the rug or literally presented as Superman, as Rishi Sunak has enjoyed for the last couple of weeks.
What I find particularly galling is that they're calling for Nicola Sturgeon's resignation before the case has even finished, on the possibility that she may have misled somebody and broken ministerial conduct rules, and yet they're not calling for the resignation of their own cabinet members who have been through court and found guilty of criminal activity while in the cabinet.
Yeah, well, it's because, like, breaking the law is kind of par for the course with this cabinet. Like,
it's almost like it's all right to break the law as long as you... It's all right to fuck people over as long as you're honest to their face about it and tell them, yeah, we're fucking you over, and they still let you do it, but...
No, they weren't honest about it. It was that they weren't publishing who they were giving contracts to. I felt that was the issue.
Yeah, at the time, yeah. But it's like, I don't know.
I mean, I think we were all pretty aware that they were handing contracts to their mates.
Did they ever release that Russia stuff?
No, I don't think that's ever actually been released. It was meant to come in after the 2019 general election, and they were just like, yeah, look, we didn't bother to investigate that because it would absolutely implicate us.
It's almost like they kept Dominic Cummings around just long enough for people to forget about the Russian thing before they got rid of him.
Oh, I mean, he was a convenient scapegoat a couple of times, I think.
Yeah, keep your distractions close. Anyway, should we move on to some Indonesian news?
If you want.
What we got? I got a dragon slayer here.
A dragon slayer?
Yeah, a prehistoric Australian goanna seduced the mighty Komodo. Apparently. Don't know what this is about. The world's largest living lizard, the Komodo dragon, reproduced with a species of lizard only found in Australia. What's this study into unusual breeding habits? Okay, so that's news. What else is happening? Black brown babbler found in Borneo. There's not an awful lot going on. 10 rescued orangutans are returned to the wild.
I went to Al Jazeera and found some more interesting stuff. It's not necessarily
that's good.
Just about Indonesia, but it involved Indonesia to some extent. I mean, there's stuff about like privatized COVID vaccines.
Yeah.
Can have a look at that quickly.
That was 5 weeks ago.
Yeah, so they're allowing private companies to import vaccines to speed up herd immunity. But I would be interested because I mean it's been, I think, quite a different situation in like the UK in terms of getting vaccines out, because like a lot of it I think has actually been produced in the UK or with people that we have like already pre-established deals with. So a lot of countries that like didn't really have that so much, either because there wasn't so much of a necessity for it or they just don't really have the infrastructure to do that. I'd sort of having a very different political situation around vaccines.
Yeah.
Because I've noticed that particularly the AstraZeneca one, it's got very different opinions in Britain compared to like the rest of Europe.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of skepticism around it outside the UK.
Rights abuses against Indigenous people. This is a couple of weeks old, but it would have been since the last episode.
We might get onto that because
this is a recent thing. So obviously there'll be something in the history that you've been looking at then, maybe, but it's something that's coming.
I mean, it would have been a little bit further back, but yeah, definitely there is.
Basically, there's a lot of countries at the moment that are trying to mitigate the economic consequences of the COVID pandemic by reviving their economies, and the NGO Forest Peoples Programme has found that forest clearing and new mines and stuff like that are supposedly a good way of clawing back some of the money, even if the indigenous communities in those areas basically lose their home to fund it. So social and environmental protections for indigenous communities have been set aside in 5 countries in favour of new projects. So there's a rise in violence and deforestation.
Yeah, well, I found that interesting because on my course to do with like ecology and environmental science, we're beginning to move on to the human part of that, rather than just like how all these systems work normally, which means quite directly confronting that capitalism has played a very big role in like speeding up, basically stripping the world's countries of all their natural resources to pay off debt with exorbitant interest rates that are lended to them basically as like a price for being colonized.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, this isn't like specifically to do with Indonesia, but I mean, so it was about Ghana has about, I think, $32 billion in debt. 26 of that belongs to Western banks. And
speaking of which, I'm just looking at one of the articles on that Indonesia page you've got up on Al Jazeera there about It was 25th of February, this article, which is since our last episode. After a gold mine collapse, they're looking for missing people. 6 dead already.
Yeah, an illegal mine. I think it's important to point out here that while those operating the mine do bear some responsibility for that, like, they're all trying to pay off someone else, and that starts with the banks.
It's weird, isn't it? Just the concept of an illegal mine. It's like, can you imagine? I mean, I'd like to think that it doesn't happen in the UK, but I'm just trying to think, can you imagine somebody's just like mining?
We probably more have like
without permits and stuff.
Trafficking for like illegal sweatshops.
Well, I don't know if this still happens, but I do remember in the news a few years back about basically slave labour being used for picking. What is it? Is it winkle picking? I don't know. It's like you get like mud flats when the sea goes out in these places where it's a really shallow gradient, and I think it was actually somewhere near Liverpool. It's up that northwest area. They'd be quite often either trapped or drowned because the sea comes in so quickly, because they'd be out there picking, I think it's winkles. Is it cockles? I don't know. Some kind of shellfish that is left on the mudflats when the sea goes out. But if they don't...
Intertidal mollusks.
Yeah, that sort of thing. But I don't know if that still happens, but they used to have gangs of slave labour kind of people picking stuff there and getting drowned when the sea came in and stuff.
Yeah. But basically, the developing world often has to scramble by like doing deforestation, illegal mining operations. I mean, this is a gold mine, so very valuable stuff, but it's quite dangerous, obviously, and presumably when you're doing that, the conditions are going to be quite fucking awful. Like, they're going to be down there. I mean, here, like, it collapsed and killed 6, but like, the conditions that they're under will probably affect others for life, and probably
but more. I mean, obviously that means there's not the correct sort of safety legislation in place to.
Well, I mean, it's illegal.
Yeah, which means if there are any regulations for safety in a legal mine, then they're not enforceable because it's not officially there, is it? So they can't kind of, and like we've got the health and safety executive here. If there was a mine and it was legal here, it would have to follow certain guidelines for safety. But with it being an illegal mine, there won't be those guidelines, which is why it perhaps collapsed, because there aren't. I don't know what their HSE health and safety situation is in Indonesia for legal operations, but
well, my guess is because a lot of Indonesia is rainforest, where some of these natural resources would be quite hard to like effectively police.
Yeah.
Because I did see that about Brazil in that same documentary, which I think was Surviving Progress, if anyone's interested. Of like how Brazil polices the illegal operations in the Amazon, because that's going to be a big thing in Brazil, and they don't really effectively have that much power, and the power that they do have is to shut down operations of people that is sort of like, yeah, you're doing the bad thing, but like you're not really the one at the top of this here, because like a lot of the politicians in Brazil actually like own quite large operations.
Yeah, I wonder how much the general population know about that. Like, what I'm trying to get at is, it's interesting seeing that and talking about that corruption from outside Brazil. I wonder how people talk about the high-up politicians from outside the UK.
Really, probably the biggest corruption thing here is to do with property markets.
Yeah.
It's just the housing market and the housing crisis here are basically the same thing.
Mm. So, do we got any more Indonesian news before we head into?
I mean, it's not
following up on
specifically Indonesia, but it's I think
in the area.
I mean, it's noteworthy of Indonesia's like political and geographical influence on the region. I'm guessing FM might be like first minister or foreign minister. Indonesia's ex-FM saying that the Myanmar crisis, which I haven't been following particularly closely. I saw that there was a coup.
Yeah, I haven't. I mean, I'm not sure whether or not it's because it's kind of still ongoing and has just sunk out of the news like things do, or because I haven't been watching as much news. But I do tend to catch some news every day, even if not as much as I did before. So if it was still in the headlines, I would probably know about it. But that doesn't, as I say, mean that the problem's kind of gone away. It's more likely that it's been squashed, or I don't know. I feel like the spotlight is just elsewhere now.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen a lot more stuff like before the coup. I think around about the treatment by the military of the Rohingya people.
Yeah.
Which I found interesting because it's sort of, and I think this is something that Indonesia somewhat shares, as we'll get into, where, or really a lot of countries share, where the army and the government aren't necessarily like one and the same.
Well, they're not now, are they? I mean, well, they are possibly now. Depends. After the coup, the military kind of took over, didn't they, in Myanmar?
But it sort of feels very weird from over here because it's sort of like, well, the government takes actions and uses the military to do them. Like, it would seem weird over here for the military to just overthrow the government.
It makes you wonder what it would take for that to happen, because I assuming at some point the military was under the command of the government, if you like.
I think it's sort of situations where the military sort of gets its own sort of political power.
Yeah. I noticed on that headline about the Indonesia's ex-foreign minister, it says ASEAN. Who's that? What's that organisation?
It's kind of like, I guess, sort of like a NATO
I was just
EU type thing for Asia.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember what specifically it stands for. I think it possibly includes like
it probably says further down if you scroll down. Association of Southeast Asian Nations.
Yeah. It's sort of a trading bloc type thing.
Yeah. So yeah, he's calling for them to stop shooting at innocent civilians, and that was only a few days ago. So it seems like it's still happening.
Yeah, it says here about Indonesia chairing ASEAN in 2011, which we'll get into how in the later stages of modern development they sort of assert their influence on the global stage in terms of that.
Okay. Do you want to let me know when we're going to head into resuming our journey through Indonesian history? Because before we do, I should insert some music.
Yeah, I think the rest of this is mainly about. I mean, there's the monsoon thing, which I think we may have covered last time.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. There was a thing I picked up on was a volcano, but that was 5 weeks ago. So
that's interesting. Indonesia banning mandatory religious attire.
Did we not cover that last time? No?
I cannot remember. My brain has turned to mush.
Okay, so before we resume our journey through Indonesian history and you remind us of the story so far, do you want to give us a story so far first before I do a bit of music?
Oh, God. Right, so basically...
potted history. This is all kind of before it becomes Indonesia as such, isn't it? It's,
Yeah, to see the difficulty is there's like different histories going on at once, and we're kind of piecing together information from different places.
Yeah.
But it kind of asserted itself using trade.
Yeah.
For the most part.
What point were we at? What point did we leave it at? What sort of century? What era?
Well, we left it around about
Start of the colonial period, or
kind of in the middle.
In the
Basically, once the Dutch East India Company had kind of collapsed or been disbanded, I forget what it was specifically called. Where is it? Hold on. Yeah, it was terminated by the Dutch government.
I'll be back. I don't know why that came out with a West Country accent.
Hold on. Yeah, but basically, kind of what's more interesting is how like different religions came in. So like you had initially a sort of synthesis of Buddhism and Hinduism coming in with indigenous beliefs, establishing itself in various kingdoms which kind of used Chinese and Indian trade to gain power. And then there was this whole thing about quite a prosperous period with the Majapahit. I always say that. I think that was right.
Well,
and then like Muslim kingdoms came in.
All of this is in the previous episode, isn't it?
Yeah.
So we're kind of, that's the stage we're at.
We're at the stage where, yeah, we'll get into that. Anyway, if you want to start.
Well, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to correct something that I did with the pieces of music in the first part. One of them, I ended up playing a sort of modern version of the Tembang Sunda, didn't I? It's music that evolved in the mid-19th century, but the one that I found on YouTube was a bit sort of poppy. So this is the vocal and instrumental music, 2 parts, solo vocalist accompanied by indigenous music instruments such as rebab, suling, and kakapi indung. Initially performed at private events such as receptions, and recently started being performed at public concerts as well. So this is the original Tembang Sunda, not the poppy one that I played last time. It's got a bit of a beat.
Oh, I think this is actually part of in Civilization 5 they use this song in the soundtrack for Indonesia.
This actual song?
Yeah, the tune at least.
Oh, right, okay.
I'm guessing it's a fairly traditional tune then.
Perhaps, yeah. This is singer Nani Sukmawati. Sorry. It's not funny, I'm sorry. I'm being very childish. Sukmawati? Okay, well, I'll leave that in the background while you keep us going then. So let's continue our historical journey.
Well, I mean, basically, the Dutch East India Company by this point had muscled out British and Portuguese colonists.
Right.
Kind of cordoning them off in areas and kind of using various political and economic mechanisms to force people to trade with them, essentially.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And they kind of just wanted the spices without actually contributing any value to the people around them.
I mean, it seems like all over that region, the huge region, that sort of Central European and Western countries are basically just fighting to get control of the resources, basically, isn't it? It's kind of...
Yeah. I mean, it's sort of...
exploitation, basically.
The Ottomans also did this to some extent. It's just, I think they had more of a territorial empire.
Yeah.
Like the Russians did. But like a contiguous land empire, I mean, rather than going off overseas. And
so they were called what? They were called the Dutch East India Company.
Well, they had a Dutch name, which I've forgotten, but that's what they've been.
So was that actually like what we would think of now as a private corporation?
Yeah, I think so, but it got a lot of money for the Dutch government.
Right. Okay. Because I'm just thinking, like, could you equate that to the similar sort of thing where, like, say, a British or an American oil company has a lot of influence in a particular region or sets up in a different country?
Oh yeah, fun fact. You know,
it's
how
not actually
everyone,
the Dutch government that are in control, but they support a company who kind of have a lot of control there.
Yeah, they kind of. I mean, it's sort of quite complex economics where it's like that. They inject the cash into Dutch society. I'm not sure how much like money went directly to the Dutch government, but you know, it goes to them in taxes as well, to some extent.
Yeah, so it's like sort of state sponsorship,
I guess. But fun fact, Norway, all the sort of high-tech stuff they have in Norway, a lot of that is gotten from colonial gains over oil companies, which Norway owns quite a lot of.
Right, okay.
I just don't like, because I'm learning a lot about like how all the countries that we normally sort of praise, and it's like, oh, they're so progressive. It's like, yeah, no, they don't care about that when it comes to foreign policy.
Yeah, I mean, there's close links between Aberdeen and Norway. Like, I know when I was at the airport, there's regular multiple daily flights between Aberdeen and Oslo and Stavanger, and you know, there's a shared interest there. All that North Sea stuff going on.
Mm.
I'm assuming there must be a line down the middle of the North Sea somewhere where it's all kind of Norwegian on one side and British on the other. And...
oh, well, that's probably gotten even more complicated now.
But are Norway one of those countries that aren't...
It's in the European Economic Area, so it will follow some of the same treaties.
Are we still in the European Economic Area, or are we?
I don't think so technically, but we kind of effectively are through the deal that we kind of have to follow.
Yeah, but I did notice actually, there's coming back to news that the EU are again threatening very soon to take legal action against the UK for breaking the rules about the Ireland border.
Mm. Well, I mean, basically the reason for like those things is like to stop fishermen literally ramming their boats into each other, which genuinely happened.
Oh yeah, I remember
Iceland.
that. Yeah, I remember that happening. I remember that being on the news.
Yeah.
Was that in the 80s?
Late 70s, early 80s, I think. But yeah, basically, kind of part of the reason that the Dutch East India Company even falls is stuff going on in Europe, because what's happening at the end of the 1700s is the French Revolution.
Right.
And this is when Napoleon rises to power and then goes and invades the Netherlands.
Oh, wow. We're getting into celebrity now.
Well, revolutionary forces go and invade the Netherlands. Napoleon's in there somewhere stirring shit up.
Yeah. Oh, you got me thinking about Bill and Ted now.
So yeah, basically the territory that the Dutch East India Company effectively had is renamed to the Batavian Republic, and then later to
Batavian?
the Kingdom.
Who's it renamed by?
I assume by kind of French-Dutch government.
Right.
Also, the monopoly they had kind of gets undermined by the French as well.
Right, okay, hang on. That's in 1795. Is that the area that became Indonesia that's renamed the Batavian Republic?
Yeah,
Yeah.
because Jakarta used to be called Batavia, and that's where they set up their headquarters.
Right. Which is interesting because I'm just reading the next point you've got on your document about Napoleon renaming the Netherlands.
Yeah, well, I think he kind of changed it to whatever suited his monarchist plans.
Right.
Because he was installing his brothers and cousins in all sorts of seats of power in Europe.
Wait, was there more than one Napoleon? Because I noticed you got Napoleon the First there.
I think quite a lot of his I think a lot of his descendants named like themselves after him.
Yeah,
because he was quite controversial, but one of these like great historical figures. I suppose.
I mean, looking at the dates, this is all kind of leading up to the 1812 overture, isn't it?
Well, that's I suppose with Napoleon.
This is Napoleon's rise, basically. He's kind of moving up and across Europe. Presumably, at some point, he's going to come up against the Russians.
Yeah, I mean, and never attack the Russians in winter. I mean, just full stop. Probably don't bother attacking the Russians. So yeah, basically, Napoleon inserted his own governor, which was one of his marshals, Herman Willem Daendels.
It's fascinating. I mean, it's really easy to almost get sidetracked into European history, isn't it? But we're talking about, I suppose that part of it's just the background that kind of makes sense of what's going on in Indonesia, or what becomes Indonesia.
Yeah. So basically, before this point, like the Dutch East India Company would have been effectively just there for the resources. Like, they would have done political stuff to get better trade, but they weren't very interested in like actually invading very much.
Yeah.
Or direct conflicts. This changes with Daendels here.
Herman Willem Daendels. Who the fuck is he?
Well, Napoleon's inserted Governor General.
Napoleon's marshal, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep.
So basically, he starts strengthening defences, builds a bunch of new infrastructure.
He becomes Governor General of
the Batavia, like the territory that they already had there in the Dutch East Indies.
Right, okay. Not the Commonwealth of Batavia, which is the Netherlands. Is that right?
Well, the Netherlands is the Kingdom of Holland.
Right, okay. The Commonwealth of Batavia includes, presumably, the Kingdom of Holland and the Dutch East Indies. A bit like the British Commonwealth, that would have included their colonial gains, if you like.
I'm not sure if this means that like he was in charge of all of Dutch colonial territories or
just that area.
Yeah.
Well, it looks like it might just be that area from what you've got down next.
But basically, what he does quite a bit is like centralizing the government, because before it would just be like, oh, this village does this thing, and like they have a king, but like, it's sort of like, so villages next door to one another might even go to war under the same king.
So I mean, even though a lot of this might seem to be a kind of a fairly brutal colonial regime, one thing I suppose that it did do is kind of unite the area, if you like, or the islands, maybe. Yeah,
we'll get into that a lot more later when the Dutch return.
Right. Return.
Yeah, so, well, basically, because if you are aware of what happens with Napoleon, the British then get control of this area, and basically the guy that runs India appoints Thomas Stanford Raffles.
They're not very imaginative, are they? You've got down there the British East India Company. We had the Dutch East India Company. Do they not? I mean, do they just have generic names with their nationality stuck in front of them, or?
I mean, they have a different name in Dutch. It's just.
Oh, yeah, I suppose, yeah.
I think it gets shortened to like VOD. I can't remember.
Yeah. Okay. So this Thomas Stamford Raffles.
Yeah, who's an interesting figure. Because he kind of wants to liberalize the economy, which meant a very different thing in the 1800s. Because like classical liberalism it's a whole thing. I don't understand economics enough to tell you what that means, but
well,
I mean, you could be more cynical here and say like, oh, this is just to get gains for the British, but he does seem to at least have some respect for the culture there.
Right, okay.
However, be aware, most of the information for this does come from Britannica. They might be a bit biased here. Yeah, he rediscovered Borobudur, which I found interesting.
What is Borobudur?
Well, way back in like the 900s, in that period.
Is it a temple by the look of what you're...
Yeah, it's a Buddhist temple, I think. Yeah, Buddhist temple. It was sort of built during a period of prosperity in Java.
Yeah.
And even published like a history book of it in 1817 before returning to England.
Right.
And he even further centralized the government and basically put it into hang on, what was it? It kind of the Dutch sort of operated on a pseudo-feudal system
right.
to try and like put their influence there.
Now, my historical knowledge is very patchy, but to me, feudalism, the only reason I know about feudalism is from my studies of English history, where they'd have like a lord of the manor and people would live on the estate that he owned. They would be fed, but that would be it, and they would work the land.
Essentially how it works is like you get awarded titles with land for like services to a certain person, and that's how power is distributed.
Right. So I mean, like for instance, you'd have responsibility for a strip of land, and you would work that land, and in return you'd be fed.
Yeah, but then you would pay certain taxes and provide troops to your liege.
Yeah,
going all the way up to it like a king.
I know it's not. I mean, it does seem metaphorically and in essence, it does seem very similar to what happens in modern society. It's just that there's money involved. You know, you've got your own patch, you've got your job,
but it's like
you kind of work the economy.
Most of them pay tax directly to the government, rather than paying it to one liege to another. It's not like this whole chain.
Right. Okay.
I think I don't really understand it enough to give you the details on that. I've kind of put a note in here of that. I don't think technically that system was feudal. It just kind of operated like it was feudal.
Well, I mean, you have said that he, in that note you've made there, that he believed it was a feudal system of government implemented by the Dutch.
Yeah,
but.
So after Napoleon is defeated, Java's returned to the Dutch, and well, that
it's funny, isn't it? Returned to the Dutch. It's like it was never theirs in the first place, really. But it's kind of
but treaties and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But the way that they'd set up the
like
administration,
just a piece of paper or something. Here you are. Here's the deed. Here's the title for that.
1,000 years of rich culture and history.
I mean, that's essentially global feudalism, isn't it? It's like, here you are, have the title to this land.
Well, I mean,
with its workers.
that's effectively all that keeps us from like owning all the islands around the world.
Yeah, now.
Yeah, well, it's a piece of paper saying you own this, and if you disagree, I have a bigger army than you to say no. Which gets very difficult when you have differing treaties saying different things about land borders.
Yeah.
And you don't want to go to war. Anyway, yes. Well, basically, the way that this has been set up by Daendels and subsequently Raffles makes it a lot more expensive.
Okay.
Because it's now got like administrative costs. They kind of wanted to keep it fairly simple, just to make a fuck ton of money without really doing that much. And now we get like revolts breaking out in Java. One of which in the Java War in 1825, led by a prince. There's a whole thing about like succession supported by Islamic leaders and stuff.
Do you know what's weird now, though? Is that the kind of dates we're talking about now are, for instance, I know my granddad was born in 1911. So there's every chance that his granddad was alive when this was happening.
That's freaky.
Yeah.
Well, this is something that I was wanting to get into in the later bit, that we are a part of history.
Yeah.
Most of the history around my life is fairly recent stuff, but at some point it will...
Do you think in a couple of 100 years somebody will be making a podcast about Brexit?
Yeah, it's a historical event.
Yeah.
It's just, it takes on a very different
What the fuck
form.
were they doing?
I think the way that it's documented now is very different.
Yeah.
So yeah, Prince Diponegoro.
That's easy for you to say.
It's really not. But basically...
Go on, say the next bit. Passed over for succession of what?
Yogyakarta.
Oh, that's not so difficult.
He got sort of left out of succession, and this happens a lot, wars of succession, where it's kind of confusing who's actually right. Basically, some people who I guess were unhappy with the Dutch government and some Islamic leaders who were doing their own thing were like, yeah, this is our chance here.
Isn't it usually the victor who's right? Because they write the history.
Essentially. So I guess it's the Dutch that's right. Depending on when you're looking at. Anyway, they basically...
Pate's sat there going, yes, it is.
Yeah, they did like basically guerrilla warfare against the Dutch, and but that like lasts for about 5 years, and then that prince is exiled to the Celebes, which are like some isles kind of to the, I think, east of Java.
Okay. It's all wars, isn't it?
Yeah, then they're drawn into a war with Islamic leaders. This isn't actually like a war between the Dutch and Islamic leaders. This is Islamic leaders fighting one another.
This is a pretty tumultuous period. You've got the Java War, a revolt breaking out into the Java War in 1825, and then what is it, like 5 years of challenge against the Dutch authority, and at the same time you've got the Dutch being drawn into another war.
Well, yeah, basically
in Western Sumatra.
They supported the locals as opposed to the Islamic leaders. And they managed to keep that going up until 1837, the Padris, which are the Islamic leaders. Okay, so now we get into 1830. Johannes van der Bosch devises something which Can I tell my Discord server to please fuck off?
It is slightly distracting when a message comes out saying we are frogs.
I'm just gonna mute this server here. And I shouldn't post memes before doing a podcast.
No.
Here we go. There we go.
Sorry about the interruption there, folks. We shall resume very shortly.
Basically, what he implements is something called the culture system. Now, we'll get into this later, where it becomes quite interesting how Dutch politicians think about this.
Yeah.
But basically, this means that every village's production, 1/5 of that is set aside for export, which would be paid to the government. And that's like their form of rent, basically.
So that's like almost like us paying 20% tax, but it's in the form of goods.
Or
Produce.
Well, basically, they're assessed for how much they think that they should be paying, and if they give back more than that, like they have a particularly good harvest, and they give more than they were expecting, they get some of that back. But, and this is kind of glossed over here, if they return less, then they just have to make that up.
So it would be like having a set level of tax that we're expected to pay, and if we earn more than that, we get some of it back. But if we earn less, we have to make up the difference.
And just to drive home just how much the Dutch were basically extracting value here, it made up 1/3 of their budget, this system.
The Dutch budget?
Yeah, the Dutch government's budget, 1/3 of that came from revenue from the culture system.
A third of their budget came from 1/5 of another country's output.
Essentially, yeah.
Which means that 1/5 of that country's output is more than 1/3 of the Dutch's.
Well, there's a bunch
budget.
of like market stuff going on here that makes it a bit more complicated, but yeah, kind of.
So basically that area is actually more affluent. Or it would be more affluent if the Dutch weren't taking.
Well, yeah, they do have some costs to run it, but the idea is that the revenues are so great from this system.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Seems a bit of a con, really.
But it kind of basically the idea is, that money was going mostly to the Dutch from the culture system, which meant that they weren't developing the area very well.
Yeah. But I mean, this is all that time that we look back on and see that this was sort of very early industrial era for our development, wasn't it? Our Western development. The countries that are kind of, we think are the biggest problem with climate change now are the ones that are developing now. But if we'd allowed them to develop when they could have done, they'd have been developing alongside us instead of a couple of 100 years later.
And that's still going on.
Yeah.
This is kind of off topic.
I wonder if that means, though, that our development would have been slower. I mean, I suppose in essence that makes sense, but it might have been better if that was the case, because maybe if we developed slower, we would have done it with a bit more
why do you think
sense?
This rather small island in Europe started the Industrial Revolution first?
Yeah, that's true.
Basically,
we
a bunch of fucking
raping the
slave
rest of the
trade.
planet.
Yeah.
Oh dear.
Oh, and remember, the Dutch are also probably engaging in slave trade elsewhere. I'm not entirely sure how much they were doing in the East Indies with that, but
It almost makes you feel like Brexit is the rest of the planet sort of ringing us through the streets going, shame,
Well, it's
shame.
Europe, really.
Yeah, true.
But also this sort of thing about like, oh, if you get surplus, you get reimbursed, and if you don't, you just have to make up a difference. That means that like inequality goes up quite a lot between different farmers, which means that you start getting like a rural ruling class sort of like.
So the farmers that are doing well get more money back, and the farmers that aren't doing well get more taken away.
And at the same time, they start making indigo, sugar, tea, coffee, tobacco, and pepper compulsory to cultivate.
That sounds very much like the system we've got in place now. Like the the corporations, the rich people get more money back, and the poor get more taken away.
Basically, yeah. I mean, it's all about what they can pay, really.
Land. Yeah.
And I mean, you could argue that this is because, like,
I wonder how much of this was driven by the banks back then, because a lot of it's driven by the banks now.
Yeah. So population begins to grow. Agricultural capacity, I guess, increases because of this, but in a very dubious way, where like very little of the value is actually going to the people growing it. Wonder if there's any parallels there. Anyway,
do we have a pausing point coming up anywhere for some muzak?
We can try and get to one. So,
what's happening next then?
There's a lot of Chinese immigration, and they kind of come into it in a sort of more affluent sense, I guess, in sort of like a merchant class, I guess.
Well, I was going to say, you can kind of understand that to a certain extent, because it's really, I know it's a pretty big bit of water, but it's just over the other side of the Ring of Fire, isn't it? What is that? The
South China Sea.
Yeah, it's like it's next door across that sea, so they're going to have trade routes naturally anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Unlike, I mean, obviously there were trade routes from here, but
also this development's kind of mostly concentrated in Java, while other Indonesian places are kind of falling behind.
Right. Yeah.
So there's like a divide there in terms of development.
Yeah.
And in the 1860s, humanitarian and private businesses attacked this culture system. Which we get into here, basically, that what I find quite interesting, they've called it the liberal policy in 1870, which allows Europeans to basically lease land for themselves from the Indonesian. They can't purchase it. And it's sort of, I guess, like, instead of extracting the value from Indonesian farmers themselves, it's like, oh, well, let's kind of get this land for ourselves to do with what we want. So private businesses rather than the government itself is getting to do this, which is why they want the liberal policy, I guess.
Which I suppose if you're poor and you've got this land available, you're going to be quite tempted to take that leasing money, aren't you?
Yeah. They did put a caveat as like, as long as it's not like literally feeding the village, like you can ask to buy land.
Who polices that though? I mean, like,
I don't know.
I mean, there must be a huge amount of pressure. If you're poor, you could rent out this field that you've got, even though it's going to make you a bit hungrier, but at least you'll have a bit of money.
But yeah, they managed to increase tenfold values of exports of coffee, sugar, tea, and tobacco. And under the liberal policy, more like development happened in Sumatra instead of Java, in plantations.
This is what I mean, it says a tenfold increase in the value of exports. So that means that these things that are being exported and paid lots of money for over here are going to be exported. They're not going to be kept in the area or used to kind of buoy up the local economy. They're not going to be...
I mean, things like coffee, sugar, and tea, they're cash crops.
Right, okay.
You're not feeding people on... Certainly not tobacco.
No.
It's not like wheat.
No,
rice.
No, okay.
You're just using that to get as much money as possible.
But which I suppose is all right as long as that land isn't needed for something local.
Yeah. But also they began expanding territory because of this success, particularly into Sumatra, and by the mid-18th century controlled all of Java essentially. And they started controlling other parts of Indonesia through various agreements with different local rulers. Not like directly like, oh, they own this land, but they kind of essentially have enough power that they effectively do. Anyway, yeah, we'll get to the beginning of the 20th century and then you can do the next bit.
Okay.
Towards the end of the 19th century, towards the end of the 1800s, basically they started really rapidly expanding the Dutch Empire there to try and cover basically all of modern Indonesia.
Right.
And so they start warring with the Muslim principalities of like Asa, to bring Sumatra under Dutch control from like about 1873 to 1908. And in various other sort of chains of islands, the Celebes and Moluccas, they basically forced the local rulers to accept their control, and did that in a lot of other places there.
Right. Okay.
And yeah, by about 1910, they effectively controlled it all.
That was the year before my granddad was born?
Yeah. And this sort of lays the backdrop for Indonesian unity, like national identity and independence movements. Right, we can do the next one now. I think that's a good place to stop.
Okay, so I mean, I did do a bit of research. I did bring up the top 30 singles chart again, but it's going to be all the same stuff, isn't it? It's what we had. It's pop stuff. The top 30 charts. But what?
No shit.
What I'm looking at next is something called Qasidah. It's an Islamic form of poetry, quite famous in Indonesia due to the country's huge Muslim population, mostly centered in Jakarta, mostly sung solo and by groups of women. It has adopted the modern versions of pop known as pop Qasidah. Traditional forms sung in villages of Java, and contemporary forms add the moral values of the new age, like targeting vices such as drinking and smoking. One of the famous all-women group of this genre is one I am going to play an example of now, called Nasida Ria. And here it is.
I'm enjoying the sort of quite boppy energy to it, I guess.
I like the pink and yellow outfits.
It's a very sort of strange... Is it pop? I
don't know. Well, they've got a bass guitar and an electric guitar there.
Yeah.
Are they bongos?
It might be like a tabla.
Oh yeah. I'm not quite sure what it is she's got there. There's an instrument. What is that instrument that she's holding? Sounds a bit like some kind of bowed string instrument, doesn't it? Okay, I'll turn that down a little bit if you want to carry on. Leave that in the background.
Okay.
We're in 1910.
So basically, this sort of liberal policy, and I guess before that, the culture system, begins to sort of be seen around the world by colonized, undeveloped nations. I don't think they're developing yet because they're being held back, essentially, as a sort of new imperialism.
Right, okay.
Because empires of old would have been something quite different.
Yeah.
This is quite exclusive control.
This is like the next stage. This is like the sort of Star Killer Empire. That's the new order, isn't it? Kind of.
This is like I guess it's sort of the imperialism of the feudal system versus the capital system.
Yeah.
And new imperialism today tends to mostly focus on that sort of thing.
So rather than sort of exploration-based sort of colonialism, rather than setting up colonies, they're kind of ruling as an empire from now on. Do you think?
I mean, I think it's more that like people would have before just had an empire around their geographic area, rather than going thousands of miles away to basically just extract the natural resources of a place that you have no idea about.
Yeah. Like an imperial annex.
Yeah. Also, with this expansion, a lot of Dutch immigrants come in, and much like I guess we get in probably like South Africa and stuff, they sort of set up their own enclaves in cities, where they're obviously quite affluent, and yeah, there's kind of divisions there drawn on like race, basically.
Yeah.
Which you would expect at this time, but I think it continues for quite some time. The service industry grows, stuff starts to urbanize.
So things really start taking off now, don't they?
Yeah, but the liberal policy, while it helps the Dutch to sort of get land here and start moving here, really doesn't really do that much for the Indonesians. So now the Dutch want to implement what they call the ethical policy, to try and improve health and education across villages.
Right.
They didn't really do that very effectively, especially as like by 1930, literacy is only measured at like 6%, which I don't think is very high even for this time.
No.
And then they want to sort of start trying to, I guess, some of their ideas come into conflict with some of the more traditional elements of Islam, which sort of sparked some of the inspiration for the nationalist movements.
Yeah.
Right, so now we get to the modern period, which I've set as starting at 1920. This is sort of when independence starts. We'll probably go up to about 1945 before next thing.
So, just put this in some context of when the so-called Spanish flu was circulating.
Yeah, I don't know how much of an effect it would have really had in this part of the world, but yeah, it only really got that name because Spain wasn't busy with World War One.
But the 20s, I mean, that was kind of known as the Roaring 20s, wasn't it? When they came out of World War One had sort of finished a while ago, and then the Spanish flu did its thing, and then things began to pick up before the Great Depression, didn't they?
So, like, the previous conflicts that are broken up were quite sort of like, it was just sort of like, oh, fuck you, Dutch people, like, we don't want your control here, like, whatever, or we're having our own internal strife, and the Dutch are getting up in their shit.
Yeah.
this here now is sort of bringing into the idea of Indonesia as an actual country.
Yeah.
Rather than just like a territory brought together by the Dutch. So yeah, it, like I said, very diverse archipelago, and they want to create something more modern.
It's interesting seeing like how it's interesting to kind of look at how the territory kind of ends up defining itself in opposition to the occupying forces, if you like.
Keeping in mind as well that this is when a lot of the world starts democratizing.
Yeah.
And like the monarchies of old begin to sort of fall by the wayside. I mean, the Dutch still have a monarchy. It's just it's not very involved in their politics anymore, I don't think. Anyway, yes.
Sounds familiar.
Well, it is like in a very fucked up way, but like not directly.
Yeah.
Yes, as you can understand, there's quite a lot of economic and social inequality here that makes people quite pissed off at the Dutch, or just Westerners in general. So a political party, I guess, starts in 1908, which is Budi Utomo, which means noble endeavour. However, this is sort of like the elite farmers from before.
Yeah.
Which kind of want to incorporate it into Dutch society.
The ones that were getting money back from the government.
Kind of, yeah. But then Islamic organizations start forming up. Sarakat Islam in 1912, under quite a charismatic leader, which begins picking up momentum.
Go on, try and say it.
I'm not going to say that.
Chokro Aminoto. I tried to. It didn't really work.
I don't think Indonesia is specifically very highly affected by World War One. It's just sort of, I guess, influence in the region might have been slightly less prioritized by the Dutch at that time.
Yeah, I was going to say it would have been there would have been secondary
involved
effects.
The Dutch actually were in World War One.
Yeah. Interesting.
Because the Germans went through Belgium.
Yeah.
I don't think they really went... I might be wrong here, but I don't particularly remember the Dutch having that much to do with it.
Well, as far as the Germans were concerned, was the Kingdom of Holland on its way to anywhere else?
Well, yeah, they essentially just went through Belgium to get to France.
Yeah, because it was going to be a lot easier for them to get across the English Channel, wasn't it, than to try and get across the North Sea. I mean, obviously they would have... It's a lot further. I mean, if they're trying to get across to the UK...
I mean, it was kind of... They were trying... But I don't think they even really wanted to fight Britain.
No.
They were trying to get to France because... bunch of complicated different alliances. Basically, Russia had fucked off Austria-Hungary, which Germany didn't like. Which meant that Germany fucked off Russia, which fucked off France, and then they had to fight France and Russia. And going through Belgium was the easiest way to fight France.
I've sidetracked us into European history again. Let's get back to Indonesia.
Anyway, yeah, basically...
It's having effects.
Following World War One, I don't know if there's any particular relevance to that. They create, the Dutch government create the Volksraad, which I guess is like People's something or other, which is supposed to sort of give Indonesians a voice in the government.
Right.
Quite... interestingly, they split the representatives here into racial divisions of Dutch, Indonesian, and foreign Asians.
Okay.
Which is interesting. But
well, I mean, just trying to think about the kind of era. I suppose in some historical eras that could come across as quite progressive, that they're giving...
Yeah, but it didn't really give them that much control of the government. It's just like they have somewhere to voice their opinions.
Yeah, well, it's important to make people think that they're being, or feel like they're being listened to, like they have a say, even if they don't.
So, this gets quite interesting. The organization I mentioned, which is the Islamic organization, the sort of one of the main nationalist organizations at this point, in 1921, the more conservative members begin to drift from the communists in that organization. And that creates like their own splits and blocks where they expel the communist bloc, and they start up in 1924 the Indies Social Democratic Association, or Partai Komunis Indonesia. We'll call that PKI. Remember, they're the communists.
Right.
So they, in 1926, launch a full-on revolt in Java and in Western Sumatra.
I don't know how much of this would have actually made it to our kind of news, but all of the stuff that was going on now would have been the news that was being consumed back here would have been on like these Pathé newsreels in cinemas, wouldn't it? And it probably a week or two old by the time people heard about it.
If you heard about it at all, it would be in newspapers, I'd imagine.
Yeah. But considering that, there was a lot of stuff going on nearer to home, we probably wouldn't have known much about what was going on here as members of the British public.
But much like party politics, even now, they weren't especially like organised in their goal, I suppose, and the Comintern, I think, had recently started up. They didn't have their support. So basically that revolt in 1926 and subsequently in 1927, both of them were fairly easily crushed, and basically that finished off the communists until like about the end of Dutch rule.
Right.
Effectively, they I guess sort of reeling from their losses there. And the Islamic organization, for different reasons, was on the decline. So here we get into the interesting part where stuff really starts getting interesting. A general study club in Bandung with an engineer called Sukarno as its secretary. Now this club begins to sort of think of nationalism as something, I guess, sort of more modern and urban.
A general study club.
See, this is interesting. I was wondering with this is like a lot of political ideas do actually like start in like student unions and stuff.
It's weird, isn't it, that? Well, can you imagine? Can you imagine our bridge club turning into so? Well, no, because you're more into like the political societies, but these sorts of discussions happening amongst clubs and groups of students, and then actually,
well, you get into that
things.
sort of point where it's like, these are passionate people that have education
and still have some energy.
Yeah, well, they have education and inspiration, which are kind of useful things together,
and a bit of youthful rebelliousness as well.
Yeah. So now they direct towards the goal of independence rather than just general ideas of like, oh, what is Indonesia? And they don't really say like, oh, we would rather be communist or we'd rather be Islamic or whatever. It's just, we want independence. Sort of, I suppose you could draw parallels to like the SNP.
Yeah, I was just thinking.
Like, they're broadly progressive, but like, they're kind of like, I've seen a fair amount of fairly right-wing people in the SNP.
They're a means to an end.
Yeah. It's a big tent sort of movement that brings together some more left-wing elements and some more traditionally conservative elements, I suppose. And students, which is quite important for getting urbans on board, or urbanites, I suppose.
I mean, people have got. Obviously, I know we're a bit biased. I'm perhaps a little less biased, being a mature student, but there's this general kind of looking down on students quite a bit. But a lot of stuff comes from. I mean, a lot of the vaccine stuff. And a lot of progress in scientific discovery comes from university research departments, doesn't it?
Yeah, no, it's you get to this weird point where you figure out like, oh, hang on, everything else is like run by people who are probably just about as qualified as me to like
Yeah.
do any of this.
Yeah. And you reach that point where you realize that we don't actually know much, and the stuff that we do know isn't guaranteed to be right. It's like you've got to kind of, I mean, there's various amounts of kind of what you might think of as proof, but the skeptical approach, the experimental skeptical approach is the best system, where progress is made by questioning and challenging everything rather than just accepting dogma. So
from this sort of study group in July, we're getting into the point where like we're having to call them months because there's quite a lot of details happening at once. July 1927, the Indonesian Nationalist Association, which gets renamed to the Indonesian National Party, which, because of the way the Indonesian language works, we're going to name PNI. Don't.
No, I hadn't even thought of it until you just said that.
So this is formed under Sukarno, and I should note, Sukarno, if we go way back to the last episode, he's the guy that came up with Pancasila, which are those 5 principles by which like the national philosophy of Indonesia is built upon.
Right.
So he's like one of the big founding fathers here.
Okay.
And he's just like some random engineer here. So they
find yourself becoming that influential.
Yeah. Well, they start a sort of campaign of non-cooperation with the Dutch colonial government in the East Indies. So in October, a bunch of youth organizations come together and they sort of begin recognizing what Indonesia would become. They create the Indonesian language and sort of recognize it as like, oh, we're a bunch of different peoples, bunch of different ethnicities, bunch of different languages, but we need a common identity to bring us towards independence.
Yeah.
But in 1929, Sukarno and some other people are arrested and sentenced to 4 years.
Do we know what for?
I'm assuming it might have been for something related to campaigning, or a lot of what happens here is like they get arrested for something quite minor to like as an excuse, or something maybe even gets fabricated about them.
Yeah, but it's basically they're finding themselves imprisoned because of their challenge to the political system.
Yeah, probably given the circumstances here. So he's released actually early in 1931, but the Indonesian National Party, PNI, is sort of beginning to lose its way without him, I guess, or without some of the top people in the party. So they form another party, Partindo, and another group forms the Indonesian National Education Club.
It's all clubs, isn't it?
This becomes known as New PNI, which is led by Muhammad Hatta and Sultan Syahir.
Come and join our club.
I don't know. Anyway, so he's
I mean, essentially, the word club there it's essentially a political party, isn't it?
Yeah, kind of. So in 1933, Sukarno gets arrested yet again.
Yeah, he's causing himself a bit of trouble, isn't he? I mean, he's obviously getting on somebody's tits if he's getting arrested.
Gets exiled, and the leaders of the other party are also exiled. And by the late 1930s, we have some people that are more willing to cooperate with the sort of idea of the Volksraad, the sort of mechanism that's been set up to give them a voice, even if it doesn't really. They're willing to accept membership into that, which I think previously these nationalist parties didn't want anything to do with, because it's like, well, you're not giving us anything real here.
Yeah. And this is, this is all just before it all kicks off, isn't it, really?
So, 1937, Garindo forms. Now, this is sort of, I guess, more radical in opposing the Netherlands, but what's happening in 1937, the rise of the Nazis.
Yeah.
So they kind of, I think we get this a lot with like the world wars, where like
it's interesting that, because you sort of see it, as an extreme organization emerges, it's almost like those who were opposed before begin to kind of club together, because nobody wants that shit. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. But World War II's where stuff starts to get really interesting. Basically, Japan, the Netherlands itself falls to Nazi Germany. Japan takes the East Indies, breaking their rule, which is where they sort of get a little bit of room to do something a bit different, I guess.
They take them.
Well, I suppose the Japanese have different ideas for what they want the East Indies to be here.
Yeah. It can't have been that much of a challenge. I expect the Dutch authorities were a bit preoccupied back home at the time.
Well, yeah, I think they were invaded before, and maybe around about the same time, but
yeah.
So, they arrest and throw in prison all the Dutch officials.
It's interesting though, you're saying there about Garindo supporting the Netherlands against Nazism. It's interesting, because I'm reading a lot of stuff in the 1940s Marvel comics at the moment, and it's interesting seeing from the sort of popular culture area how different countries see Nazism. And obviously we were well into kind of World War territory at that point, but there's a mixture of actually sort of invading forces with just invasions of ideas, and that kind of insipid creep into society of Nazism and right-wing kind of political viewpoints. It's kind of, it's almost like a sort of social virus, isn't it? Sorry, carry on.
I think it's important. I think, like, while 1930s, 1940s Germany did a lot of bad shit, to say the least, it's sort of like, that's not specific to Germans.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, it's easy to...
A lot of the eugenics that they were doing, that was going on in America before they even turned to that.
Yeah, it's, I suppose, more about the political power behind it that's...
Yeah, which gets into the whole sort of idea of, like, National Socialism. It's kind of tricking the working class into sort of supporting, I suppose.
It's like this very... It's okay as long as it's
limited idea
it.
of, it's like, oh, we'll protect our group of people, but that doesn't include all these other people that we decided aren't worth it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so basically, Japanese kind of actually get some support from the nationalist leaders. I suppose sort of in exchange for having a bit more power. It's kind of a bit of a difficult situation here, where it's sort of like, they're being occupied by the Japanese, and like the Japanese also did a lot of bad shit. But like, in their view, this would help them more towards independence if they have more power over Indonesia.
So would this have had anything to do with, what was it, the Yakuza? Are they...
the Yakuza's like kind of a mafia in Japan. It doesn't really have much to do with World War Two.
Oh, right, okay.
I don't think. At least not in like a major way that I could explain.
Right, okay. We'll maybe get onto that at some point when we do some other countries.
Yeah, they might have like more historical roots, but it's kind of difficult to really say. Anyway, so because of the way that like the colonies are kind of set up, despite being the occupiers, they're kind of initially seen as liberating them.
Yeah.
But they very quickly turn it into, well, we're only having Indonesia here because we want to get what we need for our war efforts out of you.
Right.
Because I don't think it's particularly like it's strategically important for
that's
like...
I mean, that's weird because that's almost like flipping the global positioning there, isn't it? Because
oh yeah, Japan did a fuck ton of imperialism.
Japan are like looking for resources to help them with their war effort, which is kind of targeted the other way towards America from the Pacific coast.
It's not like extracting wealth so much in such a way that the Dutch did, but
you know what I mean? It's almost like the West has kind of been forced to retreat because of Nazism from the East Indies, and because of that, Japan have been able to come in and get some help with their war effort going the other way. Do you know what I mean? It's like
but basically, Sukarno manages to convince the occupation that the public of Indonesia might support them a bit more if Indonesians were allowed into the government to have some say in the organisation there. So by March 1943, Putera, which is the Centre for People's Power, is formed under Sukarno, and this kind of allows him to become a sort of de facto leader of Indonesia, even though it's occupied.
So he's managing to stay out of prison for a while then.
Basically, he promises, I can get you support so that you don't have revolts left, right, and centre, because they're expensive to have to clean up, I guess.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it says like through policies like Ramusha, which is like forced labor, which sounds really weird, but I don't know what the explanation was for that. I cannot remember specifically. Anyway, the Japanese train a defense force, which is kind of like I suppose Indonesia's first army properly. Well, not first army, but like first army under this sort of independence movement.
Yeah, yeah.
They now have a revolutionary army that is trained by the Japanese basically to defend it as like an occupied territory, but they'll use this later.
Yeah, all right, okay.
So the Japanese later in 1944 replaced Putera with Jawa Hokutai because they thought this organization was more for Indonesia than Japan, which it kind of was, but which is sort of designed to tighten control. But about 6 months later, they announced that they want to, the Japanese announced that they want the East Indies to govern themselves, essentially.
So over a period of time, you could say the Japanese kind of liberated them, really, then?
I mean, they kind of...
in a roundabout way.
They provided breathing room for the nationalist movement there that was already kind of in the process of that. I don't know what would have happened if they didn't occupy.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, August 1945, the Japanese surrender. Sukarno and Hatta are taken to Saigon, which is in Vietnam, and they are promised by Japanese commander that they will be granted independence.
Right, okay.
So they return, and they return to the capital, where they are supposed to be sort of declaring independence they're under a lot of pressure, presumably because like they said about going to meet this Japanese commander, and the Japanese occupation's just been lifted, and there's no Dutch there anymore. Declaring independence, I guess, seems like a politically good thing to do.
And would that be a good point at which to have our final piece of music?
Sure.
Declaring independence?
Well, we haven't actually got to that point.
Oh, right, okay, what happened first?
They get kidnapped before they do that because there's just so much pressure to do that.
Hang on, there's pressure to do that, so they get kidnapped before they do it, before they get a chance to do it.
Well, they don't declare independence immediately. They get kidnapped before they do it, and then they declare it an independent republic.
What are they holding back? Why are they holding back, do you think?
I think it was just like this sort of thing, like these things take time to like draft up.
Should we? Shouldn't we? Are we ready yet?
I don't know. But they declare independence on the morning of August 17th, 1945.
Okay. Right, well, the last piece of music then I'm going to go for is an example of something called Campursari. It was created by Manthus in 1980. That's fairly recent then. It's a fusion from three styles that we looked at already. Remember in the last episode we had Dangdut, Koronkong and Gamelan. Excuse me. It's from the Javanese dialect and means a mixture of essences. It's from East and Central Java, and we've had Yogyakarta before, haven't we? We mentioned that in this episode, Yogyakarta.
Yeah, the prince was passed over for succession, and that caused a revolt.
The lyrics are in Javanese, and the instruments are similar to that of gamelan, and it's not very popular among the young people. So let's have a listen. Sorry, this is a video we're watching of this performance. There's a guy sat there hammering his metal thing with some kind of smoking thing sticking out of his mouth, having a smoke while he plays. I wonder if it'd be like, Slash playing with Guns N' Roses with a fag hanging out of his mouth.
Lah ya apot-apote ngladeni sedulurku sing saka Jaten jare. Deg-degan hatiku deg-degan nalikane aku.
He's got a groovy shirt on.
Yeah.
Ora ngirote agawe.
There we go. So, independence has...
So, they adopt a constitution, which has a president, but they have the Central Indonesian National Committee, which kind of works like a parliament. So they have a president and a parliament, which isn't the most usual thing, but Sukarno becomes the president with the committee's confidence.
A president who's been in prison?
Yeah.
It's usually the other way around, isn't it?
So, revolution breaks out because actually the British have come to basically take it back following Japanese surrender.
Why the fucking hell? Yeah, okay. We can't keep our noses out,
can we? A lot where it's like Britain just takes control of something and it's like, yeah, we'll just hold this for the Dutch.
Yeah.
But yeah, so they revolt against the British forces that are there.
Who is it we think we're fighting in that case? I mean, you'd almost understand it if Japan were like an occupying force that were kind of, not welcome, and we were maybe trying to free them. But they'd fucked off at that point, hadn't they?
They'd let them be independent. The Dutch, I guess.
Yeah.
Because the Dutch thought, oh, this is ours. We own this.
So Japan stepped in and helped them get their own independence, and then
Japan
that happens, the British
occupied it for its own interests, and in that they were allowed to move about without getting arrested a bit more.
You'd be like, would you not just fucking leave us alone to get on with our country, please?
Yeah, so they wanted it back. So they were forced to actually negotiate with the Prime Minister at the time, Sharia, in the Lingiati Agreement, which is signed in March 1947. The Dutch agree to transfer sovereignty to Indonesia. But they kind of have different ideas of what that actually means. And the Dutch basically try and get the United Nations, which has just very recently been formed, to intervene to do what they think the treaty says that they are allowed to do. So this, in 1948, gets us the Renville Agreement. But then again, they launch another police action. At the same time, in 1946, there's a sort of communist left-wing plot which doesn't want them to negotiate with the Dutch, which I guess you can kind of understand. And
complicated, isn't
in
it?
September 1948, there's a communist revolt known as the Madian Affair, which gets defeated. Right, now the second police action that they instigated following the Renville Agreement, this begins to attract American attention.
And why is that? Is there a particular reason for that?
I'm guessing.
Americans have usually got a good reason to get involved.
Well,
haven't they?
I'm assuming because United Nations like set up in New York, there's some interest there,
Right.
and also like getting new resources in the region. Because America's
Sniffing
starting
around.
to get more and more imperial.
Yeah, I suppose. I mean,
If it
Japan's
wasn't already.
just surrendered to them.
But like it's looking over the Pacific at this point a lot more.
When did Hiroshima and Nagasaki happen?
That would have been, I think, 1946.
Right. Okay. So
I don't-
America's getting a bit bolshy now. Then.
I shall look up when that happened, because if they surrendered in 1949, yeah, here we go. Yeah, it was 1945 actually.
Yeah.
Actually, very shortly before they surrender here, which is kind of a weird way in which America directly influenced Indonesian independence.
Right. Okay.
By, committing atrocities as they do.
And now they're sniffing around.
Yeah. So they have a conference at The Hague. They agree to transfer sovereignty because all these fucking agreements get kind of confusing. But
It's almost like let's destabilize the area and
Western New Guinea, which later becomes Papua New Guinea, is something separate and is something for future negotiations to figure out. Anyway, 1950, they get rid of that previous constitution, replace it with a unitary one, with multi-party parliamentary democracy with president of the figurehead. I think it kind of works like the United States, vaguely, in terms of government.
right.
So we get a few parties after independence. Masyumi, which is sort of the big Muslim party.
So
Nadlat.
I've just got this picture in my head of a load of Muslims having a party. But please carry on.
Nadlatul Ulama, which is sort of abbreviated to NU, which is kind of like another. There's a lot of Islamic parties. This one's sort of like a more, like, I guess, academic theologians party, which kind of feels very weird. A nationalist party,
They do
which,
exist.
is PNI sort of reformed. Again.
Yeah.
I don't know what nationalism looks like here, because there's a very big difference between nationalism of like British people going like, oh, we want to dominate the world and whatever, and this just being like, oh, we want to have control over our own country,
We
please.
just want to be us.
Yeah, so like, as opposed to when Nigel Farage says take back control, when these guys say
again
take back
reminds me
control.
of Scottish nationalism. It's like we're not interested in controlling anyone else.
Yeah,
just ourselves.
I would be wary with like nationalist parties like the SNP of like it doesn't cross that line because it can be quite thin sometimes.
Yeah, but I suppose
It doesn't seem to be going that way from what I've seen, but
I'm not sure what they would be seeking to control. But
and then there's separate Communist Party PKI, which I believe we had before coming back following after being like crushed by the Dutch government there.
yeah,
So, they sort of agree some things before the first election. However, before that happened, there's a bunch of different governments which kind of create instability, in which places that aren't Java are kind of angry at the government all being centered around Java.
the Sukarno's sticking around a while, isn't he?
Yeah. Well, he sticks around, I think, into the 70s.
Really?
At least in terms of influence. Well, he's sticks around, I don't know. Hang on, I'll see. Yeah, so a lot of the outer lying islands produce stuff while like the sort of more urban environments happening in Java.
Yeah.
So, Sukarno's kind of annoyed that he doesn't have more power as president. And he starts to sort of meddle a bit more in the constitution stuff.
Yeah.
Which I don't know if this is like in 1956, this causes his vice president Hatta to resign. But by 1957, he's beginning to lay out his own sort of architecture of Indonesian government.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting seeing the progress of like, supposedly coming along and trying to almost liberate a country, and then trying to impose, getting to a place where you're trying to impose. They're all thin lines, aren't they?
Mm. Well, we get to this particularly with Suharto later, which you might have actually heard of, maybe?
I don't think so.
It's a lot more popular among the world's. We'll get to that.
Yeah.
Basically, he starts criticizing like the ideas of Western democracy. Not democracy itself, but the specifically Western sort of brand of it.
The way we implement it.
Yeah. And so his idea is we'll have democracy, but with figureheads, his guidance.
Yeah.
Which is sort of loosely based on a bunch of different indigenous procedures where, like, people would come together, debate to just try and reach some sort of unanimity, I guess. I cannot say that word.
Unanimity.
Yeah. But, it's not really like how the UK Parliament would work, where you have two sides arguing, they never really agree, and one just decides all the time.
Yeah.
Because they have the power.
Yeah.
The idea is here that, you would have some sort of agreement there.
With an overseer.
Yeah, I guess sort of a moderator.
Yeah.
And so he has the four main parties, but he also sets up a national council, which has a bunch of different groups within Indonesian society.
I suppose essentially that's what you might think.
Heard.
You might think that's the role of the Speaker of the House here, but they don't have that much of overseeing power, do they? They're just.
But it's kind of undermined by the fact that they're always the member of the ruling party.
Yeah, yeah.
Anyway, so next 2 years they have quite a lot of crises here. Oh Jesus, hang on. How did this even begin? They have a state of war and siege. They form a
A state of war and siege was declared.
Oh, they begin seizing a bunch of Dutch property and want to recover Western New Guinea, which is now Papua New Guinea.
Right.
Basically, this is kind of where like the line of nationalism kind of becomes like, oh, you're kind of getting close to this here when like a nation that is now sovereign, and we'll get into that later, is now being subject to Indonesian imperialism.
Yeah.
Although at the time, I don't know, maybe it's actually owned by the Dutch. So
take heed, UK.
Yeah. So they start confiscating Dutch enterprises, which, see, this brings up an interesting discussion of like, I think we have this a lot of a discussion of like return of land to like black farmers in South Africa.
Yeah.
And a lot of the commentators we're here talking about that are talking about it from a very white perspective, where it's like, oh, well, we owned that, but it's like, yeah, but you stole it, but we owned that.
I suppose it becomes difficult when it becomes generational.
Yeah.
Because, you may well have lived on a particular piece of land and your family owned it when you were born.
But this is something that might get interesting. It's sort of how the army begins to get political power of its own. They start running these Dutch enterprises as military entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
By 1958, a revolutionary government of the Republic of Indonesia, which is backed by the big Muslim party, as well as a military commander, they launch an alternative government.
This is all happening very quickly, isn't it? I mean, like, governments are kind of, I don't know, it seems like a constant state of revolution.
I think it's this sort of chaotic stage following independence. Like, they had this very clear idea of like, oh, we want independence, we don't want to be controlled by the Dutch anymore. And then it's sort of like,
I get it, and it's, well, what do we do with it?
yeah. Which I guess should be something interesting to look at from like a Scottish independence perspective.
Definitely. Yeah.
Because you're going to have a lot of different groups within
absolutely
that looking for a very different type of Scotland. Anyway, so they suppress the rebellion, and Sukarno fully introduces this idea of guided democracy in 1959. So now there's new electoral laws, there's fucking a bunch of constitutional messes here. Basically, his own assembly rejects his budget, or rejects the government's budget. So he replaces them with a new parliament to preserve the country's unity and restore national identity. And so we're getting into this sort of like, is Sukarno like being really quite controlling here and like just rejecting democracy?
Yeah.
This is a fucking different Discord as well. So he hosts the 4th Asian Games in 1962, builds a bunch of like grandiose buildings, monuments. There's economic problems here, but like he's trying to sort of project unity with quite big symbolic gestures. Wonder if there's any parallels there.
You think in 2012?
Oh, I mean, that would be another one, yeah. I was thinking like the whole clap for carers thing is like trying to maintain unity.
Oh, Thomas, stop interrupting our podcast with your tweetage. Discordage, I mean.
But then we get into this interesting part where like the Communist Party and the army are like directly opposed to each other. And he's sort of forced to step in from the army, basically fucking up the communists. And he sort of does this in a way that's like, it could be seen as like favoring the communists quite a lot, because I guess it's sort of like defending them from the military has that sort of look to it. But some see it as sort of like, it's sort of like trying to keep this power balance.
We are gonna finish Indonesia today, aren't we? It's just because
we're nearly getting to the coup.
The coup.
Yeah, well, the military stuff is building up.
It's all destabilizing, isn't it?
By 1962, they recover Western New Guinea, now known as Papua New Guinea, with a UN agreement with the Netherlands. That by 1969, that the inhabitants of Western New Guinea could have a choice whether they wanted to be part of Indonesia.
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
At this time, like in
that's what became Papua New Guinea, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Around about 1962.
Does that mean they decided not to then?
Eventually, yeah. I don't know particularly when. We'll get to that.
Yet.
Malaysia forms around about this time, getting independence from Britain, I suppose.
As you do.
And Indonesia starts being very confrontational towards Malaysia around 1963.
Yeah, this is where we were going to save the bit about the national anthem, wasn't it? Please, yeah, carry on. This is interesting.
In 1965, going as far as to withdraw from the United Nations because Malaysia was added to the Security Council, which is quite an extreme move there.
Yeah. Yeah, it is a bit, isn't it? It's like,
Which is why Sukarno is not very popular on the world stage, and his successor, despite doing a lot of very fucked up shit, is kind of like just given a free pass because...
But they're still not friends, really, are they? Malaysia and Indonesia.
No, there's tensions there. I don't know.
Well, it's just we've got... when was it? This was at the end of 2020, end of December. There was a bit of uproar about a Malaysian YouTuber putting up a video, a parody of the Indonesian national anthem in the Malay tongue of the language because they speak the same language, don't they?
Kind of, yeah.
It turns the verses of Indonesia's public song of devotion, for instance, from Indonesia, my homeland, to Indonesia, my hardship. So it additionally changed Indonesia's symbol from the Garuda, a legendary monster-winged creature, into a scared chicken, while superimposed in the foundation were photos of a youngster peeing on an Indonesian banner. So they weren't too happy about that. But do carry on. I like the Indonesian national anthem. We'll have it again at the end.
So in October 1965, a group of army conspirators, calling itself the September 30th movement, you're a bit late on that by October, mate, but they kidnap and murder 6 generals, and in the morning they announce that they have seized power in a coup against the president by a council of generals. Now, one General Suharto, who was part of this coup, who is commanding the strategic reserve, begins to gather power in this sort of chaos here. And by the evening, there, he had managed to seize kind of the lead of this conspiracy, of this coup.
It's chaos, isn't it? So what the fuck's going on?
So the PKI, the Communist Party, were saying, "Oh, this is the army doing shady stuff within itself," while the army were saying that this was the communists trying to seize power. So basically, they kind of use this as an excuse to kill, with estimates ranging from 80,000 to up to 1 million communists.
Jesus. Is this genocide going on here?
I don't know what the technical definition of that would be, but it's...
It's political rather than racial, isn't it?
Ethnic, national, racial, or religious group. They're, more of a political group, so technically not, but it's certainly an atrocity.
Yeah.
Many of these were just like alleged communists as well. They weren't like members or anything. They also detained 10,000 people without a trial between 1969 and 1980. This is getting into the part where like this happened within your lifetime.
You see, I mean, this is just really disturbing because, you could see people labeling us as communists because of our political views.
Yeah, I mean, I would be proud to stand by that, but not to get killed for it, really.
But it is that kind of it's a political art, isn't it? Of painting your opposition to be some kind of evil.
So basically, this destroyed the Communist Party, and Sukarno really had no more power here. And by 1966, the army forced Sukarno to basically give power over to Suharto. So in 1967, Suharto is installed as acting president, and by 1968...
I wasn't born yet.
Yeah, by 1968, he's like the official president.
My brother was.
And he keeps Sukarno under house arrest until he dies in 1970.
Just a year before I was born.
So Suharto has very different ideas here. He stops confronting Malaysia, at least partially, and rejoins the UN. And see, this is a very strange thing because he sort of restores some sort of political stability here, with ideas of the new order, which sounds very sinister.
It is, isn't it? It's
so these are sort of like of bringing the economy back and getting foreign investors interested, which is maybe why it's presented like this, because like it's within foreign interest to present this as like a really great period where it's like they were committing what like we were like, is this fucking genocide like 5 minutes ago?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Like turn over a new leaf and start again. Just like not erase history, but kind of the focus is ahead now. As you might
expect, they start a state-run oil company called Pertamina, which becomes the center of their economic expansion into the 70s.
And I'm well alive now.
So this economic development begins to affect a lot more areas outside Java as well.
Yeah.
Free enterprise begins to grow. However, a lot of the business owners are Suharto's own kids, who were like given preferential treatment, as you might expect.
Yeah. This is all well into my lifetime.
Technically, even though it was instituted basically by a military coup, it's not a military regime, but it's very definitely authoritarian.
I'm interested to see where this is all going to end up, because obviously this is within my lifetime. There's a lot of authoritarian style stuff going on.
So he's sort of changes the political system quite a lot as well. He brings all the main Muslim parties into one big United Development Party, which is PPP.
Okay.
It's just Indonesian. That's what the acronym is.
Uh-huh.
And a bunch of non-Muslim parties into the Indonesian Democratic Party, or PDI.
So you've got a two-party system emerging with Muslims on one side and non-Muslims on the other. Is that right?
Yeah, kind of. Then those functional groups, that council designed to sort of instill guided democracy, starts its own party, even though it's supposed to be kind of non-partisan, called Golkar. And these guys dominate elections well into the 80s, which I think Suharto sort of leads.
Yeah. Yeah, this is. It is weird when it starts to get into your own lifetime because obviously I'm aware of all sorts.
So
of
these
shit
guys sort of impose this national philosophy, Pankasila, and
national philosophy.
he basically has free reign in elections from 1971 up to 1998.
Yeah.
Um,
And I wonder how the people who don't share that national philosophy are regarded, how they have to behave.
However, he was trying to sort of spread development to sort of keep national unity, I suppose.
So at this point, Western New Guinea's still part of Indonesia, isn't it?
Yeah, they'd gotten it, I think, off of the Dutch. I don't know. But I assume they'd decided to stay. However, there is a Free Papua movement. Suharto tries to encourage immigration to Papua New Guinea to try and get it in.
Well, there's a Windrush in the making, isn't it?
Yeah. However, this is seen as imposing Indonesian culture there, and also kind of using it to just exploit Papua New Guinea's resources.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Then the Portuguese
what the fuck?
colony of East Timor, which literally just means east, because Timor's just east. They hadn't claimed Indonesia hadn't claimed this yet until stuff going on in Portugal made it a little bit more unstable for them. So in 1975 and 1976, Indonesia kind of basically invades East Timor, which was a bit of criticism because just invading Portugal's colonies, it's not really the international cooperation thing they were looking for. And they also killed tens of thousands of people while trying to fight the movement for an independent East Timor.
Yeah, I mean, you can see why so many countries around the world are suspicious of Western influence. We don't have the best record.
The Islamic parties also weren't very thrilled about Pankasila being the guiding sort of mantra of the nation of Indonesia. Because, I think while belief in God is a part of it, it's like it's not particularly aligned to Islamic philosophy specifically. Muslim students start to criticize the government more and more for corruption and start demonstrating.
Corrupt governments? Whatever next?
They even riot when the Japanese Prime Minister visits in 1978. That sort of feels like a sort of irony there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this makes the government essentially close down the press, parts of it, and arrest a bunch of students.
Yeah, it's troublemaking students, I don't know.
Various regions sort of break out into conflict with like party politics involved in it. It's a very weird thing, this looking at party politics, where like wars are breaking out, because you wouldn't think like, oh, Labour's supporting a ethnic conflict in the Midlands or something.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
It's quite a strange thing.
Yeah.
They sort of bring about the emergence of a sort of affluent business middle class. And the army, the military becomes more prominent in things. Chinese immigration becomes more prominent, and this sort of brings in some anti-Chinese racism and maybe not like, I don't know if you would call it racism, but certainly like sentiments against the Chinese.
It's weird though, thinking that this is all like 1990s, which is coming up to is it's over 30 years ago.
So their more moderate foreign policy makes them a lot more friendly, and they sort of emerge as a leader of the industrializing world by hosting Second African Asian Conference in 1985. Wait. Okay. Oh, this is quite fucked up. Papua New Guinea, they wanted to minimize incidents on their border, and in 1989 they reached an agreement with Australia on the exploitation of seabed resources, I'm guessing around Papua New Guinea. I've heard of a lot of shady shit Australia's done in West Papua with the Indonesian government.
Right, okay.
ASEAN, the organisation we mentioned earlier.
I forget how all that area kind of leads down towards Australia.
So that organisation opposes Vietnam's occupation of Cambodia in 1978, which I didn't even know about. Like, I knew about the Vietnam War. I didn't know that Vietnam subsequently occupied Cambodia.
Which is weird because I remember Cambodia. I don't know when it became Kampuchea and what it is now. What it was, if it was Kampuchea before, or I don't know. But anyway, Cambodia was, I don't know if it was around about that time or slightly after, that it became embroiled in famine.
All right. Basically, Indonesia sort of sets the stage for its modern position in global politics by negotiating quite a lot of this around the Vietnamese occupation here. So they host the 10th conference of the non-aligned movement and feature prominently in the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation. Suharto personally serves as a chair.
Still around.
Basically, he's just very popular for working with a bunch of other places to basically get them a bunch of money, usually. But
I'm getting them mixed up with Sukarno, aren't I?
Yeah. So in 1997, this is sort of what brings his downfall here. Thailand struck by a financial crisis.
See, that looks weird. Yeah, carry on.
Which begins to sort of spiral towards other East Asian countries.
Yeah.
Which leads Suharto to sign an agreement with the International Monetary Fund. It has a bunch of conditions that he's supposed to do, I suppose, for like economic development. He doesn't really want to do that, though.
But it's interesting that it says there that after the death of his wife, his health begins deteriorating, and the exchange rate largely depended on his health.
Well, he was sort of like, if Suharto dies at this point, I mean, he's a kind of not officially a dictator, but like, there's not really anyone here to take his place that's particularly strong. So if he dies, then Indonesia's economy goes.
I mean, that's kind of borne out by that next point you've got there about May 1998.
So, yeah, he goes to a conference in Cairo. Jakarta, like, I guess sort of has a riot in which 1,000 people die.
Because? What's the riot sparked by?
4 students are shot by armed forces.
Allegedly.
Yeah, well, it's this sort of thing is like the whole Syrian civil war is escalated from, I think, possibly the shooting of 2 teenagers who were doing graffiti.
Yeah.
It's this sort of thing that's like, it was probably going to escalate at some point, but like that's the specific inciting incident.
Flashpoint.
Yeah. stuff about like students occupying government buildings. His cabinet just refuses to kind of form properly.
I've heard of this Habibi bloke.
All right. Yeah, so Suharto resigns after this, and he's replaced by his vice president, BJ Habibie, who, Indonesia's in quite a lot of political and economic turmoil.
Yeah, sort this shit out.
And between 1998 and 2004, Indonesia has 4 different presidents.
Okay.
We'll run off them very quickly. We're getting near the end. None of these guys served a full term. Although a lot of reforms were apparently made here, stuff began to democratize more, and freedom of the repressed, I suppose. The freedom
Freudian
of the press
slip.
began to return, and effective law enforcement, actually not massively corrupt law enforcement that's not just like the military.
Yeah.
But this also comes with some regions having greater drives for independence.
Oh,
Basically,
sorry, I just saw something coming up which I very much remember. Sorry, carry on.
Basically, he needed to deliver some sort of report. I guess it's kind of like the equivalent of the Queen's speech. This gets rejected by Parliament, and this gets followed by East Timor officially seceding from the Republic while Habibie's in charge.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the next guy, Wahid, he leaves because he's fucking useless, Habibi. Next guy, Wahid, is regarded as some sort of intellectual from that theological Muslims party. He's the first one to win a vote through the parliament. He has more liberal views on religion and politics. He has support from Muslims and non-Muslims. However, he gets impeached just after 19 months after a number of scandals in 2001.
Scandalous politicians, whatever next.
Yeah. So the next guy, Megawati, who is actually Sukarno's daughter, Sukarno, not Suharto, she's just around, wants to resolve some of the conflicts which are in East Timor, and as well as Aceh and Irian Jaya, which I think are in Sumatra. They're the old Muslim kingdoms. Anyway, I'm trying to get through this very quickly.
That's all right.
2002, East Timor gains full sovereignty, and the other territories that have some sort of autonomy. Irian Jaya becomes Papua, which then splits into Papua and West Papua in 2003.
So does Papua New Guinea not exist anymore?
No, Papua New Guinea exists.
Okay. That's separate from Papua and West Papua then.
Hold on. I think Papua is the whole island.
Right, okay.
This is the Indonesian part of Papua.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
West Papua is where a lot of
yeah, because I think I remember seeing on a map there's an island that's split into sort of 3 sections, isn't there?
That's Borneo.
Oh, okay. My geography is going to get better with this series.
So Golkar, which is sort of like the nationalist party of Suharto, kind of, end up with the large number of seats. Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono of the Democrat Party easily beats Megawati. So
right.
I don't know what gender that politician is. Yudhoyono faces a crisis.
Oh, this is the bit I was thinking.
Earthquake in 2004.
Was that Boxing Day tsunami?
Which then, it's in December, so I'd guess so.
Yeah, that was
which then triggered a
horrific,
tsunami, which causes widespread death and destruction.
There's a really good film about that tsunami. I can't remember what it's called now, but it'd be easy to find.
So, despite this, he manages to improve some things with political stability and economic stability following Suharto. He wins the Democrat Party a majority coalition in Parliament again and gets a second term in 2009.
They don't have much luck. I mean, political instability aside, earthquakes and tsunamis and volcanoes and shit.
Yeah, he's then faced with even more disasters, another earthquake and tsunami in Sumatra and a volcanic eruption in Java, which means that around 150,000 people need to evacuate. Later, he gets dogged by a bunch of corruption scandals and he loses a bunch of support and
Seems
eventually...
to be, fashionable.
The current ruling party, I believe, PDIP, the Democratic Indonesian Party of Struggle or whatever it was, they win in the 2014 general elections, and that's when we get President Joko Widodo. They had the most seats in Parliament, and but Gerindra, which is another nationalist party, I think, formed the majority with a bunch of other people. I don't fucking care. Basically, we're up into the present day, like around about 2015 with Joko Widodo.
Yeah, it's still all going on. There's so many places in the world that are just not stable, and you just kind of... I
mean, I think things sort of got back on track by about 2004 by the looks of things, but...
Yeah. But what's interesting is thinking about how all of this, you see the historical shit that's going on politically and geographically and imperialistically and colonialistically, and you think, how does this feel to the population?
I hope that managed to stay interesting because I was...
Yeah, I feel like you're more ready to finish than I.
My voice is gone.
I'm not surprised. Shall we have a rendition of the national anthem then? Do we know?
Well, do we want to have maybe a bit more of a little bit of a discussion? And I mean, it's like 11:15, so
yeah. I mean, we're 2.5 hours in, so
yeah.
Well done. Maybe
I've got to do another one.
Reflect. Yeah, but you've got 4 weeks. Reflect on the mammoth scale of your research and feed that into next episode. It was brilliant, really good and comprehensive. But I'm sure you've got plenty of uni work to do, so you can do less if you want to.
I've been neglecting things because I've been doing Crisis for 3 days.
Well, it's only 3 days, isn't it? I mean, I've neglected everything. I've neglected everything except my teacher training this week, so been back on with.
Yeah, so just general structure. This wasn't supposed to be 2 parts, but I think I'm glad it is.
Yeah, I mean, I think 5.5 hours would have been a bit much.
I hope it's entertaining and informative and insightful.
If not, then tough shit.
I did kind of have to rush that last bit, but a lot of it's stuff that happened in recent.
It's interesting
memory.
though. I mean, I'm fascinated now. Do we know what the next country is? Are we allowed to say?
Next country is Portugal, which
that would be very different.
They
were mentioned.
Yeah, they have some tie-ins with sort of the beginning of the colonial period and East Timor, but beyond that, not really.
Yeah, it's a very different country, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I wanted to sort of keep it to 5 quite different countries.
I shall look forward to that.
At a time.
No doubt there will be much of interest to explore with Portugal.
Well, I think we explored some of it along the way, but just generally, what are your views on particularly the modern period of who's kind of at fault there? Because there's quite a lot of different imperialistic people that are kind of overshadowing one another there.
Probably I would put the blame at the door of the Dutch and British East India companies, because like when the whole region was going through that period of forming itself into countries, if you like, uniting in regions and stuff, they kind of they were exploiting, basically.
I mean, I think
And then they fucked off.
Britain probably had a much bigger role in Malaysia and Singapore. But
Right, yeah. But I don't know. I mean, there's a lot to blame, isn't there, really? But it seems like a power vacuum
yeah,
where there is then a
It's
rush
sort
to
of-
control, and it's kind of, it's almost like it has to be really frantic, and then it might gradually
feel
settle
like
down.
sort of like the story of Sukarno, which started like as like a student movement, and by the time he graduates to power by like working with the Japanese, he has quite controlling ideas, but like
But it would be easy to
you
kind
could
of
see him
find-
as being better than Suharto in many ways.
It would be easy to kind of find yourself in that position if you've been the leader of a kind of a rebel movement that's actually won. It would be easy to find yourself thinking that you know what's best for the country, and then finding yourself trying to impose it because you can see it slipping
Yeah, I
away.
think he did get exiled twice or something. So
Yeah. Interesting. Very interesting. I really need the loo, so shall we
I
wind up?
I do find it interesting how we look now at Indonesia. I think a lot of people have a very different view of Suharto because, like, he was beneficial to American interests.
Oh, right, okay.
Basically, the oil company.
Yeah. That's always the oil, isn't it?
Yeah. Which you can
Well,
note is
It has always been the oil.
I think this is like episode. Well, it'll be 6 if we don't do any more part 2s. Venezuela. We'll get into a lot of their recent decline has basically been because they haven't let
It's interesting.
Americans in on their oil.
But historically, I mean, it's interesting. They're probably going to look back on a period of a good 200 or 300 years and refer to it as the fossil fuel era.
I hope we get that far.
Yeah. Well, you had like the Bronze Age and the Iron Age, and
Well, I guess it probably more be looked on
Will
as
this
like
be the fossil
plastic
fuel age? Yeah, but that's dependent on oil, isn't it?
Yeah, that's what I mean. But we might not use fossil fuels that whole time. I would
Right.
hope not.
But the plastic age, yeah, that's an interesting idea. That, yeah,
Or the information age, which is quite commonly referred to now.
definitely the plastic age. Well, I don't know, because plastics, yeah, we shall see. Anyway,
Yes, we should wrap up. I'm
where
dying.
does the national anthem go?
I think we did it after the outro before.
Oh, we did it over the ending, didn't we? And then into, where did we do it? Did we do it over the
I don't know.
over the outro? Okay. Well, shall we say goodbye and then play the national anthem, and I'll stick it in somewhere.
Anyway, I have been Firebolt.
And I have been the Orbiter.
And this has been Breaking Borders Episode 2, Indonesia Part 2.
Bye.
Just had a horrible thought. This has probably been played while like murdering thousands of communists.
So I'm not laughing because of communists being murdered. But it does take on a different tone then, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It felt very jolly last episode.
Well, we were at the time where it's like Indonesia's like this scrappy fledgling nation, and we've gotten to the point where like it gets into its ugly statehood.
Yeah. I mean, you can see tanks
it's-
rolling and...
Yeah. It's better than being owned by the Dutch. that's for sure. But like,
Sorry, Pate.
no, fuck you, Pate.
Yeah, it's all your fault. Wonder where Thomas is from. Do you think we can blame him for anything?
Well, he's from England, so yes.
What's the next Breaking Bollocks about, by the way?
I don't fucking know.
Ah, well, we'll find out in a couple of weeks. How bloody long is this? I need a piss. I feel like I'm desecrating their national anthem, but now I don't give a shit because I know what it stood for a lot of the time. I mean, it's a jolly tune. Oh shit, it started again. Shut up.
This podcast is part of the After Dark Podcast Network.